Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about the Neeko rework, and why, in my eyes, it's not exactly doing what I wanted to see Riot do for Neeko. Now, if you haven't seen it, the full Neeko Midscope is up on the PvE. Riot have also done a bunch of stuff over on Twitter to kind of showcase it off. You can take a look at the screenshots of the tooltips, which I'll have in the description as well. But suffice to say, Riot are taking a look at Neeko, with one of the major goals being to make Neeko feel a little bit better when actually using her chameleonic abilities. That's sort of one of the core concepts of Neeko's entire character. She is the Curious Chameleon, after all, and Neeko hasn't had to actually use any of these tools to find success. In fact, most of the time when you see people playing Neeko, they're generally not actually using her passive at all, and they use her W in what I consider to be very cheesy ways, which are basically just throwing an more or less unkillable unit at the enemy team to scout them that they can't really do anything about. This is sort of the current state of Neeko, is a burst mage with creative tools who literally doesn't need to use them to find any value at all. She literally just uses her Q, E, and R, and the W occasionally is useful, and the passive may as well not exist. Neeko basically never uses it. Now, the rework has done a few things that I'm very excited about. First, they have tweaked her AP ratios very slightly. That's not exactly the thing I'm concerned about necessarily, but one of the big things that they've changed are they have tried to modify some of Neeko's abilities to make her tricksy tools a little bit more usable. To wit, her passive now allows her to absorb the essence, or shoma, of any unit that she spends 2 seconds nearby. They have to be neutral or allied, and then she can become it at will or return to her normal form as she wants. Her form is no longer broken by combat unless she's in combat with turrets. This is to prevent sneaky split pushing. And generally, this is an interesting little spice up, because Neeko can now become basically anything in the game. She can turn into a minion, she can turn into a small raptor, she can turn into the little bit of fluff on the ground that indicates that a Scryer's Bloom will spawn there soon. Like, anything outside of, like, epic monsters or structures, she can become. And this, I think, is a huge boost to Neeko's ability to play the camouflage game. Generally speaking, if you see a champion, you're going to respect that champion, like, regardless of what else is going on in the game. You have to respect the fact that there's an enemy champion nearby. And that sort of ruins Neeko's ability to actually get value with her passive, so being able to turn into a minion, for example, is kind of a neat little tech piece that Neeko has access to. Riot have also done a small change to the W. You can now redirect the clone by reactivating the ability while it exists, allowing Neeko to potentially fake people out, similarly to the sort of quality of life changes that Riot gave LeBlanc's passive a while back. They've also changed Neeko's ultimate so she no longer gets a shield when she jumps in the air. Instead, she carries all units nearby into the air with her as a knockup before crashing them back down, which is a marginal increase in the amount of CC that the ability actually provides. Now, on paper, these look like the exact changes that Neeko is looking for, right? Her W is much more usable in a tricksy fashion. Her passive, naturally, is much better because there's a much bigger variety of things that you can turn into. But unfortunately, I think these changes aren't going to be enough. You see, there's nothing that says you have to use these abilities, right? There's nothing that says you are absolutely going to have to use these these interesting mechanics that only Neeko has in order to find success on Neeko. You are still allowed to just throw E, throw Q, press R, do the whole shebang as you've been doing before. And though Neeko's been pushed a little bit back further into the later stages of the game because her scalings have been tweaked, generally speaking, this is still on the table for her. So even though her passive and her W are much more usable from a tricksy standpoint, they aren't actually, you're not incentivized to use them in any way, shape, or form, which means that you can just play Neeko the way you've been playing her before. Part of the issue as well, of course, is that Neeko is still a mid laner. She still is going to be in the mid lane, and there's a limit to how much tricksy stuff you can do when you're supposed to be a known quantity on the map. If you know Neeko's supposed to be mid lane, and Neeko's doing things like last hitting, well, you kind of have to be there. Now, they did change it very slightly because you can stay camouflaged for longer, so you can theoretically walk into lane as your jungler, for example. You can take a couple hits, then you can say, surprise, I'm Neeko. Right, there are some maybe things you can do, but ultimately I don't feel like the kit is, or the Midscope is doing enough to incentivize the uses of these abilities. It really feels to me like what Riot could have done is given Neeko like some kind of mechanic that says if Neeko like was camouflaged and out of combat for sufficient, for X X seconds, then when she pops out, like she gets her E empowered automatically, for example, or her Q will always bloom all 3 times, even if it doesn't kill a minion or hit a champion, right? Something along those lines. Something to incentivize Neeko to try and use her tricksy tools, as opposed to just saying, they're better now, so you want to use them, yes? Because I feel like the answer is going to be just a flat-out no. Neeko passive, I think, is one of the least utilized abilities in League of Legends in general. Having seen lots of Neeko players throughout my history, it seems like a lot of newer Neeko players will mess around with it at the beginning of the game and then never use it again. Experienced Neeko players basically don't touch the ability at all, and then the bell curve of the middle are people who also just don't really touch the Neeko passive at all. And I would have liked some degree of mechanical incentive to try and make it work in order to tell players, hey, you want to do this, right? Even if you don't care about the thematic resonance, there's a mechanical, tangible reason for trying to sneak up on somebody, for trying to use the passive in clever and creative ways, and it doesn't feel like that's there, and as a result, I feel like people are just going to play Neeko as they've been playing her, as just sort of a burst mage. And that is very disappointing to me, right? Neeko is a champion that I think has a strong theme that unfortunately doesn't do anything with that strong theme, and as a result just ends up in a place where I just think she's not quite there, unfortunately. One thing that Riot are attempting to do, at least, is move Neeko into the jungle. They have a couple of jungle damage caps added to her abilities, or bonus damage to jungle monsters, my apologies, on her kit now, to allow her to maybe potentially jungle. And I think that if they are able to make her shift into the jungle, that we'll have a much better champion on our hands. I think that Neeko from the jungle, as now an unknown quantity, being in stealth, is a much more compelling place for the champion. If your mid laner's in base, for example, but you camouflage yourself as your mid laner and walk into top lane, well, the top laner might behave around you differently, right? If your mid laner is a Zed, for example, he's waiting for the shadow dash, it never comes. Instead, out comes Tangle Barbs, he's rooted, and then the guy's dead, right? Or being able to do even more creative things, like turn into a minion and hope your opponent doesn't count the minions and realize there are 7 minions in this wave. Or turn into the puff from the Scryer's Bloom and edge your way into lane very, very slowly, hoping your opponent never notices this extra unit that's here until eventually you're able to spring your trap, right? From the jungle, I think these plays are totally doable. But if they aren't able to shift Neeko into the jungle, I don't feel like it's the changes they've made are going to get Neeko to do anything other than just be the plain old burst mage that she's been before. The other issue with this, of course, is then you run into players who really like Neeko mid lane, and then they're being forced to play Neeko in the jungle because a lot of AP mid Neeko did get nerfed in exchange for some more benefits to her stealthy abilities. Right? We've seen a similar thing with Taliyah, where Taliyah jungle was found to be very good, and Riot had to balance Taliyah around the fact that she was able to jungle, and her mid lane performance suffered, and then mid lane Taliyah players were like, what the hell, Riot, right? I want to play the character in the mid lane. And I feel like that's like the place we're ending up with Neeko as well. We're just in a spot where I really feel like they could do just so much more with the character, give some degree of mechanical execution to help the character feel a little bit more like the chameleon she's supposed to be, and they just haven't done it with the Midscope, which to me then feels like we're going to end up in another situation where Neeko's going to need another Midscope, right? Because she still isn't chameleonic enough. That's just my thoughts, though. I'd love to hear from you guys if you play Neeko, if you're very happy with the Midscope, if you are totally down to play Neeko in the jungle, if you think that these changes did enough, if you actually use Neeko passive as well. I'd love to hear from you guys, and if these changes are relevant or if they're not really doing that much for the champion in general. Let me know all that down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.